Gustave Courbet was central to the emergence of realism in the mid-19th century. Rejecting the classical and theatrical styles of the French Academy, his art insisted on the physical reality of the objects he observed, even if that reality was plain and blemished. A committed Republican, he also saw his realism as a means to champion the peasants and country folk from his hometown. He has long been famous for his response to the political upheavals which gripped France in his lifetime, and he would die in exile in Switzerland when he was found responsible for the cost of rebuilding of Paris's Vendôme column. More recently, however, historians have also seen his work as an important prelude to other artists of early modernism such as Edouard Manet and Claude Monet. Born in the summer of 1819 in the small rural town of Ornans, near the French Alps, Courbet grew up in a picturesque environment with a supportive family. He enjoyed vigorous physical activities, like swimming with his sisters in the Louis River and playing in the family's pastures and vineyards. At school, Courbet relished being the center of attention and entertaining his classmates with his wit and charm. Though Courbet's general education was solid, his formal art training was mediocre. At 14, he took lessons from a minor neoclassical painter, which likely gave him a foundation to react against. Through the prodding of his father, he studied pre-law at a local college. But he was miserable until a drawing professor at the college invited him to take painting lessons in a home studio. This gave him further confidence in his artistic potential and convinced him to pursue his passion. At 21, Courbet moved to Paris. He avoided study in the studios of any of the period's many academic celebrities, nor did he enroll in the top-tier academic system for the arts in Paris, the École des Beaux-Arts. Instead, he took a few lessons from lesser-known teachers, but mostly taught himself by copying paintings by Caravaggio, Rubens, and others in the Louvre. On a visit to Holland, he was also able to copy the paintings of Rembrandt and Velázquez, while Academy students waited up to a year to pick up a brush, as drawing classes came first. Courbet made his own rigorous schedule and jumped headlong into painting. He often replicated a classical painting again and again to uncover its secrets. He rounded out his independent study by painting from nature and paid models. When visiting home at Ornans, he painted friends and family. Courbet also threw himself into his personal vision of realism, which rejected any classical treatment or rhetoric. Although this was quite radical at the time, he still focused on being selected for the official French salons. But during his first 7 years in Paris, only 3 of his 25 submissions were accepted. Gustave Courbet's self-portrait with a black dog, also known as Portrait of the Artist or Courbet with a Black Dog, represents one of the earliest milestones in the career of the French realist painter, anticipating both the ambitions and provocations that would later define his artistic legacy. Completed initially in 1842 and retouched in 1844, the painting stands today in the Petit Palais, Paris, as a document of Courbet's youthful determination to assert his place in the French art world. It is significant not only as his first successful submission to the Paris Salon, but also as a revealing exploration of identity, representation, and the tension between tradition and innovation. The painting was first exhibited at the Paris Salon of 1844 under the title Portrait of the Author. Of the 3 canvases Courbet submitted that year, only this one was accepted, marking his entry into the official art establishment. This early success, modest though it might seem, was crucial. It signaled that the young artist from Ornans had the capacity to compete on Paris's most prestigious artistic stage. The Salon, still dominated by academic tastes and rigid hierarchies, provided both opportunity and constraint. For Courbet, who would later challenge and even repudiate the Salon system, self-portrait with a black dog illustrates the moment at which he strategically negotiated these constraints to secure recognition. On the surface, the painting presents a romanticized image of the artist. Courbet depicts himself reclining outdoors, dressed in a cloak and hat, accompanied by a black dog. The informality of the pose relaxed, contemplative, almost aloof contrasts with the more rigid conventions of official portraiture. The black dog at his side functions as both a companion and a symbolic accessory, connoting loyalty and intimacy, but also situating Courbet in a natural, unpretentious setting. This emphasis on the artist's individuality, rooted in both personal life and natural environment, anticipates Courbet's later insistence on painting real subjects rather than idealized or mythological figures. Technical analysis of the canvas reveals that it was a reused support, with traces of a coat hanger at its contours, suggesting that it may originally have been presented in a slightly rounded form. This physical evidence deepens the interpretive dimension of the work. Courbet's resourcefulness, reworking of materials, and attention to presentation underscore his awareness of both practical constraints and the demands of salon exhibition. The unusual perspective, painted de sotto in su, from below upward, further enhances the dramatic presence of the artist, positioning the viewer as if gazing upward at him. This compositional choice contributes to an aura of authority and self-assertion, even at this early stage of his career. Critically, the painting reflects the broader cultural tensions of the 1840s. Courbet was working within a romantic idiom, echoing the self-expressive portraits of artists such as Eugène Delacroix or Théodore Géricault. Yet he simultaneously infused the work with an emerging realist sensibility. The natural setting, the dog, and the unidealized presentation of himself all point toward Courbet's rejection of academic allegory and toward his pursuit of sincerity in art. In this sense, Self-Portrait with a Black Dog can be understood as a liminal work. It bridges the gap between romantic self-fashioning and the radical realism that Courbet would later champion in works such as The Stone Breakers, 1849, and A Burial at Ornans, 1849-50. The painting's reception at the Salon is also telling. While it was accepted, it did not create a sensation, and contemporary critics paid limited attention to it. Nevertheless, its presence at the Louvre Palace in 1844 allowed Courbet to insert himself into the artistic mainstream while quietly signaling his divergence from it. The fact that he titled it Portrait of the Author reveals his acute awareness of self-presentation. He framed himself not just as a painter, but as a creator, an intellectual agent in his own right. In retrospect, Self-Portrait with a Black Dog emerges as an early manifesto of Courbet's lifelong pursuit of artistic independence. Though lacking the overt radicalism of his later realist masterpieces, it is marked by subtle defiance, an informality of pose, a blending of personal life and artistic persona, and a technical ingenuity that resists convention. It is, in effect, the portrait of a young artist at the threshold of rebellion, still negotiating with the establishment, yet already laying the groundwork for the seismic shifts he would introduce to 19th century painting. Gustave Courbet's Le Désespéré, The Desperate Man, is among the most arresting self-portraits of the 19th century, painted between 1843 and 1845 during his formative years in Paris. The work presents the young artist in an unflinching confrontation with himself and with the viewer, embodying both the turbulence of youthful ambition and the existential anxieties of the romantic spirit. Today held in a private collection but once exhibited at the Musée d'Orsay in 2007, the painting has become emblematic of Courbet's self-fashioning as a radical, uncompromising figure within the artistic culture of his time. The portrait depicts Courbet at close range, his hands clutching his hair in a gesture of frantic despair. His wide, penetrating eyes engage the spectator directly, collapsing the distance between painted subject and viewer. The tension of the composition is heightened by stark contrasts. The pallor of his face set against the darkness of his hair and beard. The open collar of his white shirt illuminated by a shaft of light, and the loosely draped dark scarf that lends both informality and drama to the image. Light from above intensifies the theatricality of the scene, casting dramatic shadows and accentuating the artist's expressive features. The psychological intensity of Le Désespéré places it firmly within the Romantic tradition, echoing the heightened emotional registers found in literature and painting of the early 19th century. Yet the portrait also foreshadows Courbet's later embrace of realism, in depicting himself not as an idealized or heroic figure, but as a man overwhelmed by his own emotional state. Courbet asserts the raw authenticity of individual experience. The work may be read as both a personal confession and a statement of artistic intent, presenting the artist as one who dares to confront not only the world, but also himself without mediation. Viewed in retrospect, Le Désespéré acquires an almost prophetic quality. The desperation etched into Courbet's youthful features seems to anticipate the struggles he would face as the leader of the realist movement, challenging academic conventions and provoking political controversy. At the same time, the work reveals the inseparability of Courbet's art from his persona. To paint himself in such a state was to lay bare the very conditions of artistic creation as an act of passion, defiance, and existential urgency. In this way, Le Désespéré stands as both an intimate psychological document and a manifesto in paint. It exemplifies Courbet's lifelong commitment to truth, not as an abstract ideal, but as a visceral, lived reality, whether desperate, ecstatic, or mundane. Courbet's The Happy Lovers, 1844, now housed in the Musée des Beaux-Arts de Lyon, occupies a central position in the painter's early career, bridging the space between Romantic sentiment and the nascent principles of realism. Exhibited in 1855 at the Pavillon Courbet in Paris under the alternative title The Waltz, the work was recognized by contemporaries for its emotional immediacy and intimate characterization. The fact that the composition was sufficiently important to Courbet that he produced a second version, The Lovers in the Countryside. Sentiments of youth, now in the Petit Palais, testifies to the enduring personal and artistic significance of the subject. The lion canvas depicts a man and a woman, understood to be Courbet himself and possibly Virginie Binet, the mother of his son, leaning into one another in a gesture suggestive of both embrace and dance. Their figures, rendered in profile, create a dynamic tension between intimacy and public performance. The imagery of lovers caught in the momentum of a waltz evokes romantic ideals of passion and youthful vitality, while at the same time rooting the scene in the specificity of Courbet's own life. The inclusion of Virginie Binet as a likely model reinforces this autobiographical resonance, situating the work within a nexus of personal sentiment and artistic experimentation. Technical examination has revealed important insights into the painting's development. Radiographic analysis shows that the lion version predates the Petit Palais version, and that Courbet reworked the composition extensively. The original format was square, with later additions expanding the lower portion of the canvas. Pentimenti disclose alterations in gesture and setting, including the woman's hand originally resting on the man's shoulder and a background that was once a bay rather than a landscape. These revisions suggest Courbet's careful negotiation between spontaneity and pictorial balance, underscoring the degree to which the work is not simply a snapshot of emotion, but a deliberately crafted meditation on intimacy. The Paris version, by contrast, displays no pentimenti, suggesting a more deliberate replication of the theme rather than an evolving experiment. Its smaller scale and compositional clarity indicate Courbet's effort to refine a subject that had proven compelling, perhaps as a statement of artistic maturation or as a gift within his personal circle. Together, the two versions embody Courbet's capacity to translate lived experience into universal allegory. The lovers are at once Courbet and Binet, and archetypes of youthful passion. The Happy Lovers thus operates on multiple registers. It is at once an autobiographical image of Courbet's own romantic life, a romantic evocation of passion rendered in painterly form, and a precursor to the uncompromising naturalism that would characterize his realist works. The fusion of sentiment, gesture, and self-representation anticipates Courbet's later ability to anchor broad human themes in the specificity of the observed world. In this sense, the painting stands as a declaration of artistic identity, presenting Courbet not only as a lover, but as a painter of love and interpreter of private experience transformed into public art. The Cellist, self-portrait, 1847, housed today in the Nationalmuseum in Stockholm, occupies a crucial position in the artist's formative years, when he was still negotiating between academic convention and the aesthetic impulses that would later define his realism. Painted in oil on canvas, the work measures 117 by 90 centimeters, and represents Courbet not as a painter but as a musician, absorbed in the act of performance. This displacement of artistic identity, casting himself as a cellist rather than as a painter, constitutes a complex meditation on selfhood, art and cultural aspiration in mid-19th century France. The composition presents Courbet with cello in hand, his body slightly inclined toward the instrument, his gaze focused in a manner that blends introspection with dramatic intensity. The image does not merely capture the likeness of the artist, but stages a theatrical performance of identity. Courbet as interpreter, Courbet as romantic figure, Courbet as cultural participant beyond the boundaries of painting. In the context of the 1840s, when romantic notions of the artist as a visionary genius still held sway, this self-portrait constructs Courbet's persona through the metaphor of music, a language of emotional depth and transcendent communication. Yet the work is not entirely subsumed by romantic rhetoric. The robust naturalism of Courbet's physiognomy, the weight of his form, and the earthy presence of the cello all anchor the painting in the tangible world. The oscillation between romantic expressiveness and realist solidity anticipates the dual impulses that would define Courbet's mature oeuvre. If the cellist does not yet proclaim the defiant realism of the Stone Breakers, it nevertheless reveals the artist's search for an authentic mode of representation that resists the idealization typical of his academic contemporaries. The choice of subject may also reflect Courbet's ambition to position himself within a broader cultural sphere. By representing himself with a cello, he aligns painting with music, situating his artistic identity within a polyphonic register of the arts. At the same time, the work can be understood as a strategic performance of bourgeois respectability and refinement, qualities increasingly expected of artists seeking recognition within the salon system. The painting thus becomes both a personal self-exploration and a public declaration of cultural legitimacy. The Cellist self-portrait exemplifies Courbet's early experimentation with self-representation as a vehicle for negotiating artistic identity. It embodies the tension between romantic individualism and realist materiality, between personal introspection and public performance. In positioning himself not only as a painter but as a cultural figure of wider resonance, Courbet laid the groundwork for his later radical self-assertion as the leader of realism. The work stands, therefore, as both an artistic experiment and a manifesto in disguise, announcing the arrival of an artist who would redefine the visual language of the 19th century. Courbet's Man with a Pipe, now held in the Musée Fabre in Montpellier, represents a pivotal moment in the artist's early career and marks a decisive step toward his mature realism. Executed at the end of the 1840s, this self-portrait was described by Courbet himself as the portrait of a fanatic, an ascetic, a man who, disillusioned by the nonsense that made up his education, seeks to live by his own principles. Such a statement reveals not only the painting's autobiographical dimension, but also its role as an aesthetic manifesto, signaling Courbet's determination to break free from academic tradition and construct an independent artistic identity. Unlike the more theatrical self-portraits of the 1840s, Man with a Pipe is stripped of narrative embellishment and presents the artist in a stark, direct manner. Courbet's face, framed by unruly hair and beard, confronts the viewer with a forceful immediacy. His rustic clothing and workman's pipe reinforce a bohemian persona, while the head's frontal projection into the viewer's space asserts both confidence and defiance. The absence of decorative or symbolic attributes allows the image to function as a radical assertion of selfhood. Courbet as an ordinary man, yet also Courbet as a painter who elevates the ordinary to the realm of high art. One that Courbet released from his studio. Until then, his self-representations had remained personal experiments in identity and style. The decision to part with Man with a Pipe and its subsequent exhibition at the Salon of 1851 demonstrate Courbet's readiness to engage publicly with his new artistic philosophy. The painting was well received, and its acquisition in 1854 by Alfred Bruyas, a prominent collector and close friend of the artist, confirmed its status as a cornerstone of Courbet's early career. Bruyas, whose patronage would become essential to Courbet's success, recognized in this canvas the maturity of an artist who had defined his own principles and was prepared to challenge prevailing conventions. The portrait's significance lies not only in its autobiographical force but also in its broader cultural resonance. By fashioning himself as a bohemian outsider, Courbet aligned his image with the avant-garde stance of independence and nonconformity, a position that would later underpin the ideology of realism. At the same time, the painting anticipates the artist's lifelong concern with the dignity of ordinary people and everyday life, themes that would come to dominate his most celebrated works of the 1850s. Man with a Pipe can be seen as the first mature declaration of Courbet's realism, articulating a rejection of academic artifice in favor of authenticity, individuality, and truth. It is both a self-portrait and a manifesto encapsulating the artist's self-perception as a man who seeks to live and to paint by his own principles. Through its raw immediacy and uncompromising presence, the painting embodies the very qualities that would make Courbet one of the most transformative figures of 19th century art.